celebrating World Enablement Day. There has been so much buzz going on around LinkedIn, hopefully within your own enablement teams, and hopefully a little bit of celebration amongst each and every single one of you. And World Enablement Day, in case you didn't know, is a new holiday to celebrate enablement practitioners brought to us by Seismic. And this day was created because of our profession. It has evolved and it's elevating, and we want to spotlight and celebrate our profession. And today, that's what we're going to be doing and diving into that and what it could be in the future and how we can all work collectively to enhance it. So today, we are so lucky to have some featured guests. We have Meganne and Irina. I don't think they need much of an introduction, as most of us know who these fabulous ladies are, but just a little bit of highlight for them. Meganne is currently the Senior Director of Enablement at Seismic. She's an active participant in our community. If you don't follow her on LinkedIn, make sure you do. She's part of ours, she's part of WISE, she's part of RISE, two separate communities, and she's here to help elevate us and continue to elevate us. Outside of that, she's also a mama bear. She's certified in a lot of really cool things, and she's just an overall bad arse woman. And then we have Irina. If you don't know her, my goodness, please do yourself a favor and also check her out. Give her a follow. I have a selfish thing here because she is already transforming my life continually with her new shit journal she published with her sister, From Mind Shit to Mind Shift. Again, make sure you check her out as well. Without further ado, I guess I should tell you where she works and what she does, because that's important too. She leads at Seismic. She is the VP of Global Enablement there. And without further ado, ladies, I will kick it over to you to get the show underway.
Amazing. Thank you for this lovely intro. Welcome, everyone. Happy World Enablement Day. We're so happy to celebrate with you today. I have the pleasure to run us through a short agenda, and then we're going to hop right in. So we're going to start with the rise of enablement. So we're going to do a little bit of history, some things that I actually didn't know, and I'm sure some of you might have not heard before. So we're going to start there. We're then going to get into the enablement value chain. If you had the chance to read Meganne's and my book, Tomorrow's Enablement for Today's Leader, you probably have seen this before. This is the enablement strategy we implemented at Seismic. We're then going to talk a little bit about what's next for enablers, and we will also do a Q&A. This is in smaller groups. This is the second time we're doing this today. Please drop any questions in the chat. As we see them, we might just pick them up as we go. And then ultimately, we have the Q&A in the end, so you can ask anything that is top of mind. So with that being said, we are kicking off. And like I said, we want to take just a little mini tour through enablement history. Many of us often say, oh, I've been in enablement for X years, right? 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, whatever, 20 years, some of us. And often we say, but that wasn't a word yet, right? Oh, I had a different title, but I was pretty much doing the job. So does anybody know how the whole enablement thing actually started? Like, just put a yes or no in the chat as I start talking. Like, I'd be keen to see what the level of knowledge is. No, thank you, Carly. Yeah, no, okay, good. Let me dive in a little bit as the others respond. So how did this whole thing actually begin? The modern enablement roots, they go back to 1999, right? And when sales consulting firms, they started to uncover, hey, we got a problem with sales execution. And very often there was organizational red tape and then just some roadblocks as well that prevented the sellers from just focusing on what they're supposed to do, sell revenue generating activities. And then to make matters worse, this challenge wasn't limited just to one industry or location or company size. It was really widespread amongst larger and smaller organizations with customer-facing audiences. Okay, and as we move forward, who has seen these gentlemen before? Give me like a yes or no, or maybe just one of them. So I was familiar with one of them. I had never heard about the other. So as you drop this in the chat to address the whole problem of sales execution, John Aiello, he's a former brand manager. Drew Larson, that's the one I was familiar with, was a telco consultant, and they joined forces to pioneer and evangelize sales enablement to really improve, as we all know, the efficiency and the effectiveness of salespeople through building a technology solution, right? And the rest is history. This is what got us really where we are today. So Meganne, why don't you run us through enablement today and tomorrow?
Over the past 20 years, enablement has evolved dramatically. Huge understatement, right? Look here, in 2018, just 7 years ago, you can see that there were roughly 3,200 LinkedIn users with an enablement title. Was anybody here on the call one of the 3,200 7 years ago? I know a couple of us were. By 2020, that number had grown considerably, and the market at that time was worth an estimated $989 million. But let's fast forward to 2023. Just last year, there were 300,000 professionals practicing enablement. That is a 9,000% increase from our measly 3,200 job titles in 2017. As we think and look ahead to the bright future for our space, it's estimated that the enablement market is going to be 11 times greater than it was just 4 years ago. Let that sink in. 11 times. You can see that the growth in enablement is undeniable. And just as job titles and the total addressable market has evolved and grown exponentially, so too have the demands on the practitioners and on the enablement leaders themselves. Many of us are consistently in a position where we have to demonstrate our value through the achievement of business outcomes. Irina and I have found ourselves in that position, and even just a few years ago, we knew that our team had done a ton of work for the field, but we were struggling. And the reason that we were struggling is that we were having difficulty connecting and correlating our efforts in a way that was tangible, logical, and concrete that helped our executives understand enablement did X, and therefore something happened. And it was through this experience and many lessons learned along the way, Irina, that we designed our enablement value chain to help us fix that pain. Irina, can you give us a deeper look at what the EVC is?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to paint the picture here a little bit more, the EVC for us it's programmatic, right? It really shows us or lets us show the ROI and the value, something that we struggled with. Surely many of you are struggling with even right now, right? We know this is a common topic, and we also needed something that was scalable, right? You're one person or you're 100 people. Can you do this? And we had somebody on the webinar earlier who said, hey, I'm just a single practitioner. I'm like, I can't do this. This is too much. And we're like, yeah, you absolutely can. You might not do all of it. Like, you're going to pick out bits and pieces and start to build your own EVC or enablement value chain. And the interesting thing is we had all the parts when we built this. We just hadn't put them together in the right way. And we didn't really know what was the steel thread going through it, right? Which are those two rods in the middle that we're talking about in a second, which is our analytics program. That was just something that was missing before. We didn't have that. And we needed something that fuels this whole engine or enablement engine that we have put together. But Megan, why don't you give us like an official definition of the EVC?
Sure, our official definition. The EVC that you're looking at here is a truly strategic approach that's driving cross-functional collaboration. It's elevating the enablement experience for the field teams and unlocking value-based insights. And we use those insights to enhance our enablement effort while consistently securing executive buy-in. We often say that the EVC is both an art and a science, and the science is represented here by all of these different gears that you see in the orange belt that goes around the top. But the art of it is in the orchestration of how it all flows together, because each piece has a purpose that is interconnected with the other one. When we implemented this EVC over the course of the past 18-24 months, when we started, we were seeing enablement participation somewhere in the neighborhood of 70%. After implementing this, we are now consistently seeing 90% engagement on our initiatives. And through this process, we've also been able to correlate our efforts. So to give you an example, when we first implemented this EVC, we were able to very clearly see that the people who participated in our enablement activities, and we'll go into what that tactically looks like, the people that participated in those enablement activities were booking opportunities that were 225% higher than their teammates who didn't show up to the enablement sessions or take the content that we'd put forth. Anecdotally, through this experience, we have been able to gather a stronger voice of the field. We have tighter relationships with our cross-functional partners. And importantly, we're making it easy for our executive team to understand how we are contributing to the business. So let's dive into the key part of the EVC. And Irina just mentioned this, the greased rod or the analytics report that makes all of these gears work smoothly together. This is one of my favorite parts of the EVC. And I think, Irina, you feel the same way. Do you want to take us through what this is?
Yeah, absolutely. As Megan already said, what we're looking at here is really what we call our analytics program. As I'm talking, if you have an analytics approach in your organization, drop it in the chat. I'd be keen to look through afterwards and read a little bit what you're all doing in that regard. So pretty much, I'm going to give you a little bit of history of how we got here. Like we had a year where we collected a lot of data. And as we get to the end of the year, we said, let's look what the impact was. And we spent, I don't know, 3 weeks to go through this stuff and look, and we just couldn't really show the correlation, right? Like we sliced it and diced it, but we knew there was something there. We were just not able to find it. And we sat down with our data team and they said, hey, we just got to change the approach a little bit. How about we look at it through the lens of enablement engagement? So the activities that we have done, like live sessions, lessons, paths, certifications, practice, etc. The behavior changes, like are folks actually engaging with our content, with what we call pages within Seismic, right? So this is a collection of content and information and knowledge that we're sharing with the field. Specific behaviors around, are they using the decks we're providing? Are they using the talk tracks? Are they sharing the content externally? And sometimes very specific things to our program. And then ultimately outcomes, right? What do we want to see? Might this be a reduced ramp time or an increased renewal rate or a higher attainment or whatever it might be, depending on the particular program that we were running. And as we pulled all the information and the data person by person, we were then able to benchmark groups against one another by outcome and say, hey, let's look at all the people that actually brought in a booking related to a field play in a particular quarter or a particular year, and let's see if their behaviors were vastly different than the ones that didn't book a deal, right? And probably for 85% of our programs, we saw over and over again that there was clearly an effect that the enablement had on behavior changes that ultimately allowed us to drive outcomes. It's ever evolving, but we're very lucky to work here at Seismic and have a product team that has built us a product around this process that we can now use. And we probably spend around 120 hours before per quarter manually doing these things. And this now got cut down probably by % of the work. It's been really great. And it's been super fun to build it within the organization and having stakeholders involved here as well. Okay, super. I would say let's move on and dive into the next piece of the EVC, right? As we look here at the top, this is really the core, right? What we call 360 enablement. Megan, why don't you run us through this a bit and explain this further?
360 enablement by any other name is revenue enablement. It is the spirit of the practice of serving all of our customer-facing teammates, regardless if they are on the buying journey, which is the classic SDR, account executive, all the sales side, or if it's the value journey, which is all of our friends on the post-sales side of the house. Think about customer success managers or services teams, those folks who are on that side of the customer experience. A true revenue enablement practice is servicing all of those folks who are on part of the customer lifecycle. So one of the first things that we did when establishing the EVC was gaining clarity on the customer lifecycle. Irina led a project prior to me coming on board about establishing the customer lifecycle at Seismic. This is a critical component to get buy-in from your stakeholders and to really start building that cohesive language in the organization, because we all need to be centered around the customer experience, and the customer lifecycle is the very first step in getting that accomplished. When you have that lifecycle established, then you are able to plug and play with your enablement practice. We found 3 very important pieces to the idea of 360 to be process, methodology, and skills. I'm sure many of us are familiar with this idea of a sales process, sales methodology, sales skills. When we say those 3 things, we are leaving off an entire swath of the organization by not being inclusive and bringing them into the fold. This philosophy, this gear is all about having a field process. It's about having a field methodology, about having field skills. In fact, we're going through an evolution right now with our skills where we're only focusing on the skills that are agnostic of role to drive more synergy and acceleration in the organization, as opposed to having 15 for AEs and 10 for customer success managers and so forth and so on. So those 3 pieces also provide us the basis by which we can build out our 360 enablement function.
So Megan, question for you. Can I effectively run 360 enablement in my organization if I want to build this up, if any of these 4 key pieces are missing? And if so, how can I compensate for any of these missing pieces.
To truly have the full 360 approach, you need all four across the bind and the value journey. Having said that, the reality is that many practitioners are not there yet, and that's okay. And if you're not there yet, start with identifying the biggest gap. For some early stage organizations, that could be something like creating and building your sales process in partnership with somebody in operations, for example, because if you don't have the sales process, there's no way you can build out a field process. So you've got to button up the sales process and get that adopted before you can build out your value journey process. Similarly, with your field methodology, when you are in a position to pick a field methodology, you want to pick something that can sing across your entire go-to-market team, not just your frontline sales folks. But the key and the takeaway here is to start small and build. This thing took us years to put together. It just didn't come together on the fly. But importantly, for us to think about activating a 360 enablement team, we have to think about how we structure the enablement team itself. So even if you are a team of one, I think this is an important piece for you to be familiar with. Most practitioners on this call are likely familiar with the concept of field enablement and how that is serving the go-to-market team. And field enablement is important, right? We're the ones that are actually like doing the enablement. But we often can't solve the bigger challenge, which is around reinforcement and adoption through that behavior change. And it was for this reason that we created the field activation team. Irina, can you describe the difference between those two teams?
Yep, absolutely. And Shanti, you want to move us one slide forward? That would be awesome.
It seems to have disappeared, but we can try one. But if not, okay, I'll play Vanna. Can you see my
It's not a problem. Yes. So we're talking about the two little gears that sit underneath that orange belt. I can just talk through. It's not a problem at all. So what it says, if you can't see the writing, so like Megan just said, it says field enablement and field activation, right? So those are the two motions and teams that we have in our overall enablement team. And field enablement, most of you are obviously familiar with that. Those are the roles that you're probably sitting in right now, right? So you're responsible for identifying the programs, do the program build, and then roll out to the field. For us, that also means that team is responsible to drive engagement. Our engagement across the board for mandatory activities is always over 90%. That's the number that we're pushing. That includes live sessions, lesson certification, practice, and everything that we do there. And then the field activation team, that is the team that then comes in and helps drive behaviors and also helps to drive outcomes. And the outcomes usually happen by themselves if the behaviors are driven in the right way. So think about the collaboration between the two teams. If, we're building a house, right? The field enablement team comes in, they dig the foundation, they bring in the contractors, right? They build the whole thing up. But that doesn't mean that our field teams, they're actually going to live in the house, right? Sometimes they just come in, they look around and then go back out, right? That's it. They're not doing anything with it. So field activation then comes in and goes, let us pick your furniture. How do you want to paint your wall? Okay. And every house might look a little bit different on the inside, right? Because field activation makes sure that it's customized, right? And that the folks are actually staying in the home. That's ultimately the whole purpose, right? We don't want to push out enablement and then nobody does it. And I'm sure this is something that everybody's a bit familiar with, right? And I'm sure we've all been there. And the collaboration between the two teams is super critical. And activation provides the analytics report as well that we just talked about. So that is the team that's driving those findings and driving the interaction, between field enablement, field activation. And then also they deep involved in everything that's coaching and additional data findings back that they bring back from the field to the field enablement team. So that collaboration is super important.
Irina, let's go one click deeper into how these two teams work together. So as we bring this idea to life, let's use an example of an initiative to illustrate how these two groups can work together.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe we can do that through the effectiveness circle.
Yes. Okay. And if anybody has a current initiative that they're doing, like you can drop some examples in the chat here. Otherwise, I'm going to use one of ours. So think back EVC forest, right? High level strategy. Now we're getting into the trees. Okay. We're getting to program execution. How does this work and how does field enablement and activation work together? So I don't see any examples. So I'm just going to pick narrative, right? I'm sure we all rolled out a new narrative along the way. So as we start the program, we decide, okay, this is what needs to be done. Now we're sitting down and we go, okay, this whole thing needs to be scoped. What is the team collaboration? What stakeholders do we need to bring in? We're also starting like the design phase already, right? Plan. For us, we're using programs and Seismic. This is where all our planning happens. Keep it all in one spot. And also at this point in time, we're also deciding what engagement are we expecting. For us, it's pretty clear. It's always over 90%. But how much do we want the pages to be visited and the content to be used, like general expectation, what behavior changes do we need to see, and what outcomes do we want to see? And it's critical that we're deciding this in the planning phase, because if we decided later in the program, we might eventually not hit those metrics, right? This is where field enablement and field activation really comes together on the table and works together as well. Then we move into the enable phase. That's heavy field enablement, right? So we're pushing everything out. This is really the final development, partnerships we're delivering. There's practice involved. And at this point in time, that team is also responsible for driving enablement engagement, again, to over 90%, right? From here happens a little bit of a handover as well. Sorry if I have any background noise here. A little bit of a handover as well to the engage phase. This is where field activation heavily comes into play. So they come in and look at, okay, where do we stand? Do we see behaviors changing? Are they impacting and uplifting the customer experience? There's additional insights happening that we're pulling out of program analytics for us, like right in Seismic. And we also start to build like a mini report to get an idea, hey, what's going on? We meet on a regular basis with our councils, something we're going to talk a bit more in a second, and then really say, hey, what's the problem? What's happening here? What do we need to attack? Is the program rolling as we expect it to be? And then this moves us to the last phase. This is really when field activation is the driver, but field enablement comes back in, where we want to see what has improved. So we're providing a full analytics report at that point in time. We're doing a review with our enablement team, field enablement team, but also our other councils that we have. We're communicating the outcomes out, and then ultimately also decide on additional actions that we need to take. And again, heavily driven by field activation, but supported by field enablement. So that's where we stand. Why don't we move to the next slide? And I talked about this a little bit already, and talk about our council motion, which is very important, because if we don't have good collaboration with our stakeholders, the whole EVC is ultimately not going to work, right? So these are our cross-functional partnerships. So Megan, talk to me about the council motion. What are councils and why are they so important?
Councils are providing the framework for interactions with multiple teams. And these specific teams really depend on your organization, but I can give you a sense of who we work the most frequently with at Seismic. So importantly, that is our enablement team. That's the gear that says Enablement Council. That's our enablement team. We also partner frequently with product marketing and with operations. So they each get their own council. And then our field council is made up of the senior level leadership of the revenue organization or the go-to-market organization. Each of those councils we essentially meet with every, call it 5 to 6 weeks, depending on the cadence. And we are using our analytics report as the primary conversation driver in these meetings, where we are either, depending on the audience, we are either gathering action items coming out of the data, or in the case of our field council, which is all the senior folks, we are agreeing on the top priorities that we should go after to address those challenges and to address those solutions that other teams came up with.
That's awesome. And what's the council's role in the enablement analytics program, right? Like I mentioned, obviously, this is why we're doing it. So we have connection with our internal stakeholders. So how important is that interaction within the councils using the data and the insights that we're providing?
Oh, it's critical. It is so critical because data does not lie. So when we bring that data to the table, we are getting different perspectives on that so that we can ensure that we are getting feedback. We're not operating in an ivory tower. We're getting the feedback. We're also aligning on those mutually agreed upon actions based upon what we are seeing. If we didn't have that repeatable motion, we would be operating in a vacuum.
And so we often hear from folks, and obviously you and I talk to enablers all the time, right? Be it customers, prospects, or just folks in the enablement space, that a lot of them also struggle to have strong relationships with certain group of stakeholders, right? Very common problem. And so for us, we have identified the council motion, also specific councils that we're meeting with. Why for us, the field and then enablement council, marketing and ops as well. Walk me through that.
For us at Seismic, these audiences are the ones who are most closely tied to the supporting motion of the field. And so we are ensuring that each of these groups has a voice in the process. For you, maybe you don't work often with your product marketing team, but maybe you are tied at the hip with your demand generation team. You could set up a council with that group. It really is dependent on who in the organization is most closely aligned with the objectives that you're looking to achieve.
I got one more question for you before we move on to
Oh,
the next section.
okay.
How can I adapt this model if I now deal with different stakeholders? Maybe not those, right? And then also, how would I prioritize who I'm going to set up a council with?
Who to go first? Well, the key here is to nail it and scale it. Do not start with 6 different teams that you want to work with. You need to start with the group with whom you have the tightest connection and build from there. This process, you're going to have to work out the kinks based on the available data that you have, and you need to have an environment where you can have that vulnerable conversation. So start with the group that you have the tightest connection with. For example, if you are tight with your go-to-market leaders, start engaging with them on this basis while you're building out your relationships with, call it operations or with marketing. This takes time. This is not something that you can rush, and your ability to build that relationship in a really intentional way will pay dividends later on. You also want to make sure if you are in an enablement team with like other people and you're not a team of one, you've got to make sure that you are bringing your enablement teammates along on the journey with you and getting them warmed up to this idea of using data, collecting the feedback. This requires a lot of trust from the team, and it's important that you invest time there. So that's the EBC in a nutshell. We've just gone through all of the science of it and talked a little bit about the art. Irina, let's talk about how we can really bring this to life with all of these different components. How does it all flow together?
And you don't have to remember all of this because you can pick up our book and all the details are in there as well. But I'm going to give you a high-level run through. We call this the quarterly enablement analytics loop. And I'm going to start on the left-hand side with those yellow gears and the purple gear. So at the beginning of the quarter, we have different programs running, right? Sometimes they have just started, sometimes they're 3 months in, 6 months in, like it depends on what it is. We're building our analytics report. So we're pulling out all of the data. Most of it comes out of Seismic. We might need a couple of additional data sources there, tie it all together, person by person, benchmark our groups and see what we find. We bring it to our councils, enablement council first, and we say, what's not working here, right? Let's put an action plan together. And then we bring it to our business councils, and we usually add like a couple of additional action items there. If we advance one slide, so we bring those proposed actions to what we call our field council. So those are our CRO's direct reports. And we say, we bring them the report, obviously a little bit more background. And then we say, hey, here are the things that we think we should do. Here's where we need your help, additional input. And then from there, we start executing really over the following 6 weeks or so. And then we putting together just a little update and say, here's where we stand. Here's what worked. Here maybe a few things that didn't work. And then as we advance one more slide, we get to mid-quarter, and we're also bringing those findings. If you look at the little magnifying glass at the bottom, we bring those back to the council, right? And in that council motion, we're also saying, hey, maybe some people didn't do what they said they're going to do, right? We look back at the action items, we really understand where we stand. And if some of the numbers also have changed, right? If what we did actually worked, we'll bring those findings also back to the field council to discuss. And then from there, we do almost like a mini communication. We take a few slides that we provide to our enablement ambassadors that they can take and share with some of the managers and the field teams as well. And then ultimately, we're sharing the report or bits and pieces of it, depending on who we're talking to with our executives. And we get to the end of the quarter, summarize all of the feedback, and then it feeds back into any of the programs that we're running the following quarter or continue to run. So this is the high-level motion that we go through. We're in a pretty good spot. We've been operating in this manner for quite some time now. The outcomes are really good. The discussions are getting deeper and deeper. And like Megan said, so our opinion is obviously valued, but when our opinion comes with data behind it, different story, right? So it just puts us in a completely different position here as well. Okay, super. I think this was most of our content today. We have a couple of things to close us out later. We do have time for a little bit of a Q&A. If anybody either wants to come off mute or drop a question in the chat. I know, Shante, you're happy to moderate that if there are any questions today.
We're small and mighty. It's an intimate crew. It's a Monday afternoon. What are the odds you get these two powerful ladies in a Zoom? Let's not be shy, enablers.
Little shy today. Yeah, there is one. Thanks, Eric.
Could you give some examples of the data you're using to track behavior change?
Yeah, totally. Happy to do that. It depends on the program, right? I give you an example. Let's say like I said, we're rolling out our new narrative, right? So what we would be looking at on the engagement front, we'd likely do live sessions. We'd probably do some practice, right? Certification, like for them to practice the talk track and are they talking about the narrative in the right way. We might do some additional practice that comes either in lesson or path form. We do this in seismic learning. Then we're going to measure the engagement with our pages, right? So if you're not a seismic user, this is the place where we're collecting all of the content and the knowledge. So are folks visiting those pages? Are they using the content? Now we're talking behavior, right? Are they taking the decks and are they what we call live sending them or putting them in a digital sales room, right? That's the way how we can track also customer and prospect engagement on the other end. So we actually know, is that content landing or is it maybe not, right? This is very good insights for us. And then we're also looking at what are some of the keywords that they're using in conversation, right? Usually those decks have specific phrases and words that we're after. We're tracking that in Seismic for Meetings, right? So we get all of those inputs in programs, which is a product that's included in Seismic that we're using for that. And that for us would give us enough insight to see, are we actually seeing outcomes, right? And here, so we know for our narrative, like we've seen significantly higher win rates for the folks that have executed the narrative well. The last time we rolled it out, I want to give you a different example. So we looked at the data across the course of the whole year, right? So 12 months, specifically for a field play that we have rolled out that was related to a product launch that we had done earlier in the year. And what we were looking at was the engagement with our pages, with our playbooks, right? Because that was holding the content and talk tracks and like all the things really that we needed them to look at to execute that play. And we looked at the top 20% and the bottom 20% of people, just AEs that were engaging with the pages and with the content, like heavily engaging. And what we saw over the course of the whole year was a significant difference in enablement engagement between the bottom and top 20%. And live session attendance, lesson completion was different and lower for the folks that didn't have high engagement. And same for content that was externally shared, pitches and talk tracks used, same type of behavior. And when it came to outcomes, those folks had an 86% higher win rate related to booked opportunities within the target accounts that we had set for this particular field play. And they also brought in 5 times more opportunities, so built 5 times more pipeline overall. So this is just some example. Obviously, there's plenty. If you have a particular program that you're interested in hearing about, you can ping me on LinkedIn as well, and I'm happy to give you more insights there.
Who's trying to go back to their company and have some of these kind of success rates to tell your CRO? Everybody's going to be real happy. Carly, you had a question, my dear friend.
Hi, honey. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. Thank you guys for all of the content and information sharing. Super helpful. Another question I think that a lot of enablers would have is that I know that like when I first started my career, I was definitely more of that order taker. And as I've gotten more acclimated and rooted and just confident in my role, I'm being very mindful of coming to the table and being that like thoughtful partner with my hiring managers. And so you had mentioned having a different type of conversation with coming to the table with data. What are some other things as the VP and Director of Enablement that we can do like that during when we're meeting with our field council and stakeholders?
We often talk about moving from a fire department mentality, which is like the order taker, you're putting the fires out, playing whack-a-mole, moving from that fire department into the fire prevention so that you are in a seat where, I mean, listen, fires are going to happen, but they are much less frequent and not quite as hot. We'll put it that way. I think step one with that, Carly, is making sure that you've got a clear enablement charter set in your organization. Step number one, bring it back to the basics. If you don't have that, your organization does not have clarity on how they can be interacting with you. That's got to be the first step. The second thing to think about with that data is think about the audiences that you are working with and how that data could relate to them and what's important to them, and using that as your basis to go forward. Another thing that's really helpful is the intake request form. So when you are an order taker, the intake request form by its nature is you taking things in. But there's a second conversation that needs to happen there on, yes, we'll take this on and here's why. Or yes, we'll take it on, but it's backlogged for 6 months and here's why. Or no, we're not going to take this on and here's why. And I think those delegations are very often an area of opportunity for practitioners because they don't have the structure or the ability internally to say no and push back. But I think that mentality of triage can also help you shift that conversation a little bit. Did that provide clarity with what you were seeking, or should I provide additional insight?
I think that is good. And then if there's anything else that you guys would look to your teams to go to have more value-based conversations when they're enabling, if anything comes to mind.
When they're I'm gonna break this out because I hear when we're enabling and I'm thinking about the tactical facilitation stuff. And of course, in that motion, we want to make sure that we are actually providing something that's going to help do their job better. The way we do that is through what we call our ambassador motion. The ambassadors are folks who roll up to me on the field enablement side, and they are aligned one-to-one with audiences. They have regular check-ins, both with the managers and leaders of that audience, as well as the individual contributors. And those engagements and those meetings follow a 3-part agenda consistently every time. One is, let's look back over the past 30 days. How did it land? We launched that new narrative that Irina mentioned. Tell me about how it's landing. What feels good about it? What's working? What's not working well? The second piece is, tell me what is preventing you from achieving your goals today. Sometimes that's super tactical. The ops team put that new field in Salesforce and now it's 8 clicks instead of 2. Okay. But it might be something bigger. Wow, I don't know, we have a big conference coming up and nobody knows what's happening, or something bigger, right? That is preventing me from hitting a goal. The third thing we ask or that we tell them is, here's what's coming in the next 30 days. Tell me how this is impacting you. Depending on the level, it might be, here's our objective for the session. Will that help your team? But it could be as tactical as, here's an exercise we're running in the breakout session. What do you think? Can we play it out? Would you want to participate and help us facilitate that breakout session? So I think those are ways you can also be providing value by making sure that you are answering the question that they need to have answered. Does that make sense?
Yes, and exactly the type of info I was looking for. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. What other questions are out there?
If there are no more questions, I would say let's move to the last part. What's next?
There is a lot of activity happening in the enablement community this summer. What a time to be alive, right? First up, Seismic's podcast is back with the Enablement Edge. This year's podcast is all about enablement. So we have Steve Watt, who's one of our teammates, talking to enablement leaders and experts about increasing go-to-market productivity, driving operational efficiency, becoming change agents, and really helping all of us level up in our practices. So this is going to be launching 2 weeks from tomorrow on June 25th, wherever you get your favorite podcast. Go to any of those apps. Irina, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Shift?
Yeah, let's talk about Shift. This is our Seismic's annual user conference. In case you haven't heard about Shift before, it's returning to San Diego from October 8th to October 10th. Maybe you've been there once, or if you've been there 5 times, like some of us. We really invite you to push what's possible for your career and for your team and for the enablement industry as a whole. And this week only, if you want to attend, you can use the code ED24 for World Enablement Day and get 50% off when you purchase 2 passes. If you want to learn more or you want to look into it, you can go to seismic.com/shift. And then the other thing that I'm going to talk about, which is also very important to mention. So the Revenue Enablement Society is also excited to announce their 2024 Experience Conference that's happening after shift, end of October to 24 in Chicago this time. And the RAS Experience Conference, that really focuses on equipping you with the tools, but also the insights that are needed to demonstrate your value effectively senior leadership. So very aligned to what we were talking about today. And obviously you can learn more and also register today at resociety.global. Okay, and I think with that, I'm handing back over to Shante.
And I will take some squad updates. I missed this part at the beginning because end of the day on a Monday brain, here we are. If you are new to the Enablement Squad, we are a free Slack-based community by enablers, for enablers, all around the world. And we do these really cool things called hackathons, where we get together and hack topics that are all aligned to a specific theme. For example, onboarding is the theme, and your topics might be measuring effectiveness and impact, ramping programs, stakeholder management. You talk about those amongst different teams and different tables, and then you come back together to leave with a full playbook on onboarding as the example. We have already had 3 this year, and they have all been smashing and super fun. Lots of great pictures, lots of great fun. They are always followed by a fun happy hour to network and gain additional insights from our peers. We'll be in Chicago on the 25th of this month. Or yes, we like Chicago too. We all love Chicago. We'll be in Denver on July 23rd and Boston on the 21st. We also will be doing super hackathons in both Chicago and Denver, where we will have keynotes and full workshops. We'll be partnering with Christina Brady in Chicago and the Practice Lab and Jonathan Mann for Denver. Stay on the lookout. We are coming to many more cities, and we'll also be in London in October. We also offer webinars like this one we are all in now. We have a couple coming up. We will be doing sales deal rooms with Doc and a new member quarterly workshop to welcome everyone to the squad and show you around the land of Slack. We also do programs. We have a mentor-mentee program kicking off in just a couple of weeks. Mentee applications are closed, but we are still accepting mentor applications through the 16th. And we also have a leadership lounge, which is an exclusive community to leaders who have 2 or more individual contributors under them. And it is for leaders to grow and gain insight and thought leadership by leaders for leaders. So similar to the squad, for enablers by enablers, this is a specific emphasis for our leaders. And with that, thank you, Seismic. Thank you, Irina. Thank you, Megan. So many wonderful nuggets to take away. And thank you, all of you enablers, for attending. Happy Monday. Happy World Enablement Day. Any closing words, ladies?
No, not really. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Make it a good one. Have a little toast and a little glass. I know it's Monday, but it's a good occasion. And yeah, happy World Enablement Day. That's really it for me. Megan, what about you?
Happy World Enablement Day. It is such a joy to partner and brainstorm with practitioners on a regular basis and to collaborate. This is such a special community, and we're so glad that all of you are part of it.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Monday. Cheers.